Look at a cat today. It sleeps 16 hours a day. It knocks your glass off the table for fun, and it expects you to clean its bathroom like a servant. You might think this is a recent dynamic, but history proves humans have always been owned by cats. To understand this toxic relationship, we have to go back to ancient humans. 10,000 years ago, during the Stone Age, humans invented agriculture. For the first time, early humans stopped wandering and built permanent villages. They gathered massive piles of stored grain to survive the winter. But stored grain attracted millions of wild rodents. Mice and rats flooded early human settlements. They destroyed food supplies and brought diseases to early tribes. Ancient humans were completely helpless against the rodent invasion. Enter the African wildcat. These fierce ancient felines noticed the massive rodent feast in human camps. They walked out of the wild forests and straight into early human villages. They didn't ask for permission, they simply started exterminating every rat in sight. Ancient humans realized these small predators were protecting their survival. An unspoken alliance was formed between ancient humans and wildcats. Humans offered safe shelter and fresh milk. Cats offered absolute biological pest control. Over thousands of years, this simple partnership turned into outright worship. Welcome to ancient Egypt, a place where cats held absolute divine power. If a house caught fire in ancient Cairo, priorities were clear. You didn't save your furniture or gold, you saved the family cat first. Killing a cat in Egypt was a severe crime. In fact, it was automatically punishable by execution. Even if you killed a cat by accident, you were sentenced to death. Angry mobs would gather outside your house to demand justice. When a family cat died of natural causes, grief was immense. The entire household would shave off their own eyebrows. Yes, their actual eyebrows. They would wander through the streets crying and mourning for weeks. Cats were mummified with the utmost royal respect. Egyptian priests used pure linen, gold leaf, and jewels. Millions of cat mummies were buried in massive underground tombs. To the Egyptians, cats were not mere pets. They were living embodiments of the warrior goddess Bastet. They protected the pharaoh's grain from rodents. They killed venomous cobra snakes in the desert homes. And the enemies of Egypt were paying very close attention, especially the expanding Persian Empire. In the year 525 BC, Persia decided to invade ancient Egypt. The two massive armies met at the fortress city of Pelusium. The Egyptian army was formidable and highly trained. They had heavily armored elite guards and skilled archers. The Persian king, Cambyses II, devised a chaotic strategy. He knew the Egyptians would rather die than harm a sacred cat. So he didn't build bigger catapults or heavier armor. He ordered a massive cat collecting operation across the region. Thousands of stray cats were gathered by Persian troops. On the morning of the battle, the Persian army deployed their secret weapon. Persian soldiers painted images of cats on their bronze shields. Then they placed hundreds of live cats on the very front lines. Some Persian soldiers even carried live cats in their arms while charging. The Egyptian archers raised their bows to shoot, but they froze in complete terror. If they shot an arrow, they might hit a sacred feline. Hitting a cat meant eternal damnation for their souls in the afterlife. The entire Egyptian army fell into complete psychological panic. Nobody dared to swing a sword or throw a spear. The Persian army marched forward completely untouched. The Egyptian soldiers dropped their weapons and fled the battlefield. Persia conquered ancient Egypt in a single afternoon, all without losing a major fight. It was the first time in history a war was won using animal shields. For the next 1,000 years, cats remained sacred and untouchable. They sailed on Roman merchant ships to keep grain safe. They spread all across the European continent. Everything was going great for felines, until Europe entered the Dark Ages. Fast forward to the 13th century. The year was 1233. Enter Pope Gregory IX. He issued an official papal decree called Vox in Rama. It was basically a fan fiction document warning about satanic cults. According to the Pope, Satanists worshipped black cats in secret rituals. He claimed the devil himself transformed into a black cat. Overnight, cats went from sacred guardians to demonic creatures, especially black cats. Superstition swept across the European continent like wildfire. If an old woman owned a cat, she was labeled a witch. If a cat crossed your path, your soul was in immediate danger. If a cat looked at you funny, it was casting an evil curse. The European public went into a state of mass hysteria. Towns began organized extermination campaigns. Across Europe, a massive cat genocide began. Cats were thrown off high church towers for public display. They were burned in massive street bonfires on religious holidays. In some cities, the feline population was wiped out entirely. People genuinely believed they were saving their immortal souls. They thought they were cleansing their towns of evil spirits. In reality, they were setting up their own doom, because nature always maintains a strict balance. And breaking that balance comes with a heavy price. Here is a very basic rule of ecology. If you remove the apex predator, the prey population explodes. What animal reproduces rapidly and eats stored grain? The black rat. What animal keeps the black rat population at absolute zero? Cats. With no cats left in medieval European cities, rats threw a massive party. Millions of black rats invaded the streets of Paris, London, and Rome. They infested wooden houses, crowded markets, and food supplies. Nobody cared about the rats because they weren't considered demonic, but those rats carried a hidden passenger. Millions of tiny, hungry fleas, and inside those fleas was a deadly bacteria. It was called Yersinia pestis. In the year 1346, the consequences finally arrived. The Black Death officially hit the European continent. It was the most brutal pandemic in human history. People began dying within 3 days of catching it. Dark, painful swellings appeared on their skin. High fevers and internal bleeding followed shortly after. Entire families died inside their own homes. Dead bodies piled up in the middle of city streets. Entire villages became completely abandoned ghost towns. Ships drifted across the ocean filled with dead crews. Over 200 million people lost their lives. That was roughly 1/3 of the entire population of Europe. In some crowded cities, half the population vanished, all because there were no cats left to catch the rats. So how did medieval Europeans respond to the nightmare? Did they realize their biological mistake? Did they stop killing cats? Absolutely not. Their medieval logic made things 10 times worse. They believed the plague was a punishment sent by God, or a curse cast by witches and the devil. So they concluded that more satanic cats needed to die. They hunted down the few remaining cats with even more rage. They killed more cats in public squares, which allowed even more rats to breed freely, which allowed even more infected fleas to spread, which created even more plague cases every single day. It was a vicious loop of medieval ignorance. If Europeans had just kept the ancient Egyptian laws, millions would have lived. Ancient Egyptians used cats to protect their civilization. Medieval Europeans killed cats and nearly destroyed theirs. Doctors wore strange bird-beak masks filled with herbs. People whipped themselves in the streets praying for mercy. Nobody suspected the actual killer was riding on rat fur. After years of horror, the rat population began to stabilize. Surviving sailors started bringing cats back onto trading ships. Merchants realized ships with cats had far fewer dead sailors. Slowly, cats were reintroduced into European towns and homes. The cat population gradually recovered over decades. As cats returned, rat populations collapsed instantly. The flea population dropped alongside the rats. And the Black Death slowly faded away into history. It took humanity centuries to recover from the loss, but the lesson was carved into human history forever. Never mess with the natural food chain. Fast forward to the modern world today. Cats have reclaimed their rightful position at the top. We buy them organic food in fancy tin cans. We buy them plush beds they completely ignore. They dominate the entire internet culture. Billions of cat videos are watched every single day. They sit directly on your warm laptop while you work, and you just let them do whatever they want. Because deep down in our collective human memory, we know, we remember the time we tried to fight them, and lost. Hit that like button and subscribe to Human Unpacked for more animated history. Share this video with a cat owner and see you in the next episode.